This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
So Batchelor, who's a principal lecturer in the Department of Creative and Visual Communication at Buckinghamshire University, where he researches queer tango, its historical dimensions, and champions queer tango as a means of fostering leadership and personal skills. In research, he uses it to support deaf people in accessing music and musicality, and teaches tango to footballers to counter homophobia. With Bert Hafmoller and Ilaria, he co-edited and contributed to the Queer Tango book. He wrote Henry Ford, Mass Production, Modernism and Design, so a lean there towards design history as well, and is co-founder of the Queer Tango Image Archive, a digital collection of historical pre-1995 images relating to the themes and issues touched on by queer tango. And Jon Mulholland, who's Associate Professor in Sociology in the Department of Criminology and Sociology at Middlesex University. Jon teaches and researches in the areas of race, ethnicity, nation, religion, migration, gender, and sexuality in popular culture, and is the principal investigator on the project Serious Leisure as Mediated Activism, the case of queer tango, which featured on BBC Radio 4 recently. And both Ray and Jon are co-organisers with Hélène Marquis of the Queer Tango Salon, Connecting Bodies of Knowledge, a research event for academics and activists in Paris later this year. So do Google that after this. But today they're talking about queer tango, bent history. So over to you both.
Thank you very much, Philip. Queer tango, bent history, the late modern uses and abuses of historical imagery showing men dancing tango with each other. Get the hang of this machine. There we go. Ascend the winding stair to Lugar Gay, an LGBT community centre in Buenos Aires and queer tango venue, and you pass a reproduction of an old photograph of men wearing aprons in a market posing in tango couples. Elsewhere in Buenos Aires, a cropped version in a glass case of the same image at the National Museum of Dance and Hall of Fame is labelled Baile Popular en el Abasto, 1910. Yet another photograph of men in a street, some standing, some posing in couples, with a seated bandoneon player, is a still more well-known example of this genre. Historical images of men dancing or practicing tango with each other. Marked especially since the tango renaissance is documenting important dimensions of tango's de facto history, their meanings remain contested. Drawing on a methodology of visual ethnography, this paper examines how historical photographic and non-photographic representations of male same-sex tango dancing are deployed in contemporary late modern contexts. Specifically, it will examine the manner in which these are used in both mainstream and queer tango-related web and publicity context to variably confirm or contest an official history of tango. Employing a Foucauldian framing that seeks to understand not only the manner in which the histories of subaltern constituencies become subjugated, but also become a resource for resistance and struggle, we will show that in the hands of a social media-driven international queer tango community, such historical representations of men dancing tango form an emergent queer iconography that seeks to reclaim and revisualize a marginalized past in the name of an ascendant queer contemporary. The histories of the Argentinian tango became distorted or obscured by those to whom they have had significance. Robert Farris Thompson's forensic poetic study reinstates tango's obscured West African origins. Tango's histories of sex and sexuality are argued over with little sign of consensus. Jon and I are routinely reassured by other dancers that tango started with men dancing with each other Jeffrey Turbine describes a tango history choreography in the 1987 film Tango Bar, where men dance with each other, but stress they are showing how men practiced the better to secure the dance and other favours of women. They ham it up, conspiratorially asserting their heterosexual credentials. In the 1990s in Buenos Aires, older male dancers told Christine Denniston how when younger they practiced with other men for up to 3 years. Doubtless they had their reasons for telling her this. With an historical gender imbalance in the early 20th century of 7 men to 1 woman, such accounts seem plausible. To some extent they may be true. Yet Jorge Salesi and Magle Saikin offer an alternative, or earlier, or additional account of men dancing with men. Tango developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries at a time of emergent modernity, and was initially viewed by the elite in Argentina as a threat to the growth of a modern, European-style state. In Argentina, as elsewhere, both sexuality and crime became territories for objective, scientific investigation. They were documented, described and analysed, signalling the formation, indeed, of Foucault's disciplinary society, where the human subject becomes the object of new, scientifically underpinned technologies of knowledge and regimes of power. From such records, Salesi and Saikin argue that while tango was chiefly danced by those on the margins of society, the poor, criminals, pimps and prostitutes, it was routinely and openly danced by homosexual men and lesbians, free to dance with whomsoever they chose, having little social status to lose. Yet when wealthy Argentinian men who had encountered tango in the bars and brothels of Buenos Aires took it to Europe, they were something of a hit with women, not least in pre-First World War Paris. In the late teens and early 20s, as tango migrated from the conventillos and brothels to the salons of Buenos Aires, it no longer posed a threat to the nation, becoming instead an emblem of national identity. Incidentally, this neat, plausible account is itself challenged as myth by Ricardo Garcia Blaya. One way or another, polite dancers needed a respectable pass. Lesbians became invisible. Men dancing with men was reconfigured as a benign, demographically necessitated logic of practice. In both cases, its overtly erotic content was ruthlessly eradicated. Meanwhile, whatever was being said or written, the dance was danced, and it was documented through representations, photographs, postcards, drawings on sheet music, and so on. A persistent quotient shows men dancing with men. In 1903, the first known magazine photos of Tango Criollo, in Caras y Caretas, showed Arturo de Navas dancing with another man. Whoop. Hang on. There we go. In 1904, men are photographed with rolled-up trousers battling in the River Plate, apparently dancing tango with each other. In Paris in 1913, in a comical drawing on sheet music, the young Maurice Chevalier danced with another man. In another photo from 1910, 3 men couples, probably stallholders from a Basto market, stare at the camera in tango poses with their colleagues. In another, undated photograph, men in the street, apparently late at night, casually dance, practice, or pose. The purpose of this paper is not to explain how each of these or similar images came to be, nor to use them to help us understand better what men dancing with men might have meant at any one time and place in the past. A further paper is needed for that, and it is planned. Instead, acknowledging the fact of their creation, their subsequent digitization, free circulation and reproduction, allied to the confusion surrounding their precise historical significance, We consider how these images are used in the 21st century and ask, to what ends? These are our first tentative thoughts. We would, of course, welcome yours. Queer Tango was created in Hamburg in 2000 and has spread to countless modern urban contexts. It is, in the Foucauldian sense, a subaltern constituency of tango mainstream. In 2000, it appeared to have no history, beyond a nod towards pre-existent queer theory, or as the latest expression of the gay/LGBT liberation movement, which established alternative spaces apart from the hostile, heteronormative world. Queer spaces are distinctive. As Brown, Lim and Brown asserted in 2007, radical queer spaces are important because they provide a constructive and practical attempt to offer a non-hierarchical, participatory alternative to a gay scene that has become saturated by the commodity. They are experimental spaces in which new forms of ethical relationships and encounters based on cooperation, respect, and dignity can be developed. The queerness of these spaces is constituted as much through the process of building relationships on this basis as it is from any attachment to specific sexual or gender identities. Inherently post-structural, queer politics intervenes from the margins and grassroots, redefining and expanding the political, constructing shared meanings, linking past, present and future, and giving voice to subjugated lives. Some locally emplaced queer tango clubs prosper, while others struggle. International queer tango festivals have multiplied, and some closely resembling their mainstream touristic tango neoliberal equivalents. As Melissa Fitch demonstrates in Global Tangos, Buenos Aires joins other instances of queer tango activism, becoming queer tango tourism. Karlsruhe suggests that leisure communities tend to extend themselves in time and space by establishing carefully edited and attractive websites, and in doing so facilitate interactions between offline and online realms and across territorial borders, creating linkages that enable the diffusion of ideas. We mounted online searches of 4 images to establish how and why they are being used. In 2016, online image searching has never been easier nor more treacherous. Images can be found by using keywords, but also by dropping the images themselves into the search box, such that the search engine becomes independent of the words in the search engine's default language. Once found, the web pages provide the context. It may have little or no information, or inaccurate information, or information with no indication of sources about the images. It is probably only a matter of time before Microsoft's caption bot automatically generates captions, not just for selfies, but for casually used historical imagery as well. Yet all searches are revealing in terms of what the presence of this image in that context tells us. Halberstam urges queer academics to participate in the ongoing project of recoding and interpreting queer culture and circulating a sense of its multiplicity and sophistication. We found these 4 images in 5 types of context. Firstly, mainstream websites with entries about tango or queer tango. This story in Time Out is about queer tango dancer Nick Stone inviting Mariano Garces to London in 2011. Stone tells me Garces probably chose the image, suggesting its use as a contemporary icon of queer tango and an implicit historical vindication. The English language Wikipedia entry for tango includes the same image, bizarrely cropped, saying nothing about it, or what it shows, or means, and gives an improbably early date for it. The image marks an awareness of a past, but a past not easily accounted for or negotiated. The Wikipedia entry for queer tango includes historical imagery of women of the kind generated for mild heterosexual titillation, but no images of men at all. A bias which may reflect the fact that there are more women queer tango activists than men. 2. Mainstream user-generated web pages such as Pinterest. Here, the images are pretty much shorn of any contextual information and take the form of elements in a mood board for the Pinterest curator's chosen theme. There is work to be done here about the effects of such usage. 3. Mainstream tango websites. Again, the imagery is usually not discussed or commented on, but contributes to a silent system of signs of tango authenticity. The Bandoneon, Buenos Aires. Where it is commented on, as in this Australian blog, So Tango, men tangoing with men, why? They support gender-based innovations in contemporary practice. In this case, the benefits of men learning to follow. Or on the Tango Hub website, same-sex tango for straight people, paradoxically to advocate women dancing with women. Yet they do not invariably support liberal ideas. The placid 1904 paddling image crops up in this Russian example, tacitly supporting the view not only that men danced it in brothels in order to seduce women, but also that the dance between men originated in knife fighting. Myth. So, square brackets. Phew, that's all right then. Close square brackets. And queer LGBT websites. Just looking at one, Qualia Folks' website uses the street image as a banner for the whole group, whose avowed objectives are twofold: education and celebration. It now provides the Qualia Encyclopedia of Gay People, open access to all and free of charge. Its entry on tango, and note tango, not queer tango, is illustrated by a chiaroscuro image of queer tango activist Augusto Balizzano dancing with another man. It says tango is an erotically charged late 19th century ballroom dance that was performed by men with men in Buenos Aires and Uruguay, in houses of prostitution and on the streets. With its origins as an erotic male-on-male folk dance, tango can be considered an LGBTQ folkway with rural gaucho and urban African Argentine roots. Setting aside the merits of any of these assertions, we note that the imagery is used here to raise queer sensibilities among queers and the wider world alike. And finally, queer tango online presences. As we draw towards our conclusions, we offer just 3 examples. The simplest use here is on the Facebook group of the Hamburg-based queer tango community, Jungs tanzen mit Jungs, boys dance with boys, who have the 1904 paddlers as a banner. It chimes with their deliberate gender bias. The second is on the website of the Parisian La Viande Rose 3, queer tango event. This year's theme is the relationship of queer tango to the so-called Golden Age tango, conventionally 1935 to 1955. The image of 10 smartly dressed young men posing in 5 couples, which, as Birte Hafmöller has pointed out, with another one behind the camera would be enough for a football team, is used here with no overt discussion of its significance, but as implicit validation. In both cases, the imagery is being used to reinforce tango's sense of its identity and its place in an historical perspective. There is a debate to be had about the legitimacy of this use. A debate fostered by our third And final example, the Queer Tango Image Archive. Queer Tango is but one case of the queer's reclamation and reconfiguration of subjugated knowledges and histories for the pursuit of queer political ends. Such a strategy places the virtual archive centrally. Judith Halberstam asserted in 2003, in queer subcultures where academics might labour side by side with artists, to which we might add here, or dancers, the historic bloc can easily describe an alliance between the minority academic and the minority subcultural producer. Where such alliances exist, academics can play a big role in the construction of queer archives and queer memory, and furthermore, queer academics can, and some should, participate in the ongoing project of recoding and interpreting queer culture, and circulating a sense of its multiplicity and sophistication. The more intellectual records we have of queer culture, the more we contribute to the project of claiming for the subculture the radical cultural work that either gets absorbed into or is claimed by mainstream media. As we have seen in this preliminary excursion, the emergence of the virtual realm has re-augmented a public sphere in which competing and contesting representations of hegemonic norms and meanings. The Queer Tango Image Archive offers an online digital archive of historical pre-digital imagery. It includes men dancing with men, but its remit embraces all historical imagery touching on the themes and issues connected with queer tango, including women dancing with women, women leading, men following, and indeed any imagery which can stimulate and develop the debates surrounding the phenomenon of queer tango. In this final example, not only is this imagery being overtly used to reinforce queer tango's sense of its identity and of its place in an historical perspective, but in a way designed to stimulate informed debate towards such ends. This study is a first stab at understanding the contemporary uses of a rich and suggestive body of material. At its core is the image. We have identified different contexts, each with its different uses of and effects on the image. We have identified a range of means by which meaning is generated and the roles the image can play, ranging from the tacit and implicit to the overt and explicit, with the image as evidence. Finally, the product of these two variables is a third, the wide and occasionally contradictory range of different meanings the image can be used to support. More scholarship is needed to identify the circumstances which brought such images into being. Contemporary uses adhere to or ignore such scholarship as there is. The validity of contemporary uses is not invariably a function of closer adherence. Imperfectly understood historical graphic material can be used to advance legitimate, contemporary, social and political agendas. We argue that this entire territory shows channels of social and political debate of greater or lesser formality, validity and consequence. All are interesting, all warrant further exploration. And that's it.
Ilaria is a curator and an arts historian and the programmes manager at the Contemporary Art Society in London. Her PhD at the London Consortium focused on the relation between dance and visual arts in the Weimar Republic. And today she's going to be speaking about Modernist Muse, Gret Palucca, jazz, shimmy and golliwog in the Bauhaus.
Thank you again. I'd like to open the paper with a quote that started my research. My painting was sold to a dancer who apparently has a wide dance studio, and now my canvas is hanging there as a focal point when the dancer is at rest. So I'm told. Rather nice, huh? This is a letter of Piet Mondrian writing to architect Piet Hout, and enthusiastically about the location of one of his paintings. The studio where the painting was located, and you can see it at the back, was the studio of Gret Palucca, a Dresden-based dancer associated with Ausdrucktanz, who found herself in a cultural milieu dominated by Pygmalion, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Wassily Kandinsky, Elitzky, Leonard Feininger, Paul Klee, Oskar Kokoschka, Georg Kolber, amongst many others. Palucca was not just simply a danseuse, but a prominent yet rarely acknowledged figure in 20s Germany. She was part of Ausdruckstanz, which is usually translated in English as expressive dance, but also meant modern, new, freely, artistic, and generally eschewed the rigid imposition of ballet, opening a wide range of possibilities for physical movement that occurred in parallel to new abstract investigations in the art, as modern painting exemplifies. This paper will present how the dance image of Gret Palucca circulated widely in print media, but also how her image was directed towards the Bauhaus context. It will distinguish some characteristics of her modern dancing and discuss how these included popular dance forms. Lastly, it will highlight how Palucca consciously built an image for herself, closely related to modern art, because that's how she wants to be remembered, as the dancer with the modern painting. So through a marketing strategy directed towards an association with the Bauhaus circles, the photographs taken by Charlotte Rudolph are present in two major Bauhaus publications, Kandinsky Point Line to Plane of 1925 and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy Painting, Photography and Film, as well as in other artwork, posters and experiments of Bauhaus students, such as this poster of Marianne Brandt. These images point to the success of Palucca to target her image to the Bauhaus. While her involvement was hugely facilitated through her family connections, as she married the son of one of the most prominent collector of Dresden, Ida Wiener, there were some elements of her dancing that attracted the attention of the senior Bauhaus artists. So this is a photograph by Charlotte Rudolph taken at the beginning of Palucca's career in 1924 that shows Palucca jumping outdoors with outstretched limbs. Elevated above the ground, she's a contrasting figure in the clear sky. Rudolph framed the dancer geometrically, as the focal point of the image are the legs that gives width to the photograph, interpreting the compositions as designed to promote the dancer public image. And indeed, the photograph was successfully absorbed in different contexts, first published in the women's magazine Die Dame, and later in Wassily Kandinsky Point Line to Plane. The dissemination of Palucca's images bring forward the hypothesis that Rudolph's photographs may have posited a target of circulation, one that situates Palucca as an avant-garde performer and the modern dance star. Apart from this strategic initiative and the professional alliance of the two women, the Dame's article on Palucca reveals her dancing. Pavel Barkman, a critic of the time, discusses how the photograph suggested unexpected movement. In her dances, Palucca is punched, hammered, shot out of a gun. She's like a scream, and rhythm is her language, her overpowering life, he writes. He describes her dancing with a vocabulary that indicates the staccato singularity of the action, punch, hammer, shot out, revealing how Palucca's choreographies had a dynamism and vigor that broke with the tradition of classical dance, as well as the norms of dance writing. The vocabulary also refers to the distinctive moment that characterizes this photograph, where the photographer hammers Palucca, shoots her down in an image, and punches her into a two-dimensional representation. When thinking about the success of these images in the books and magazines, we must consider the photographer's modernist touch, the untouched photograph of Palucca, and the way it is well focused and framed to make this image more apt to circulate. Another photographer, contemporary Rudolph, who also studied under Uwe Erfurt, depicts Palucca in a different way. She's jumping with her legs bent to her torso and her hands spread in front of her crotch. Her body is closed up, she's jumping above a rock, a posture in union with the developments of modern dance, but also a picture that displays an aesthetic shift to a more inclusive category of movement focused on actions and reaction, which might be interpreted as natural, spontaneous, primitive, and almost primordial. Contemporary critics recognize an acrobatic soul and acrobatic effects in Palucca's dance, and indeed Fiedler and Rudolph images depict Palucca's virtuosity, but a closer reading reveals the presence of certain popular dance forms. While framing Palucca's movement into this quasi-primitive setting, the photographs are combined with a certain degree of eroticism and naturalness. These images can be compared to certain iconographies in German expressionist paintings, where dancers are depicted naked in the woods. Palucca is floating above a forest in Rudolph's image, jumping across rocks in Fiedler's image, feeding directly into an imaginary that is natural, primitive, and wild. Details such as the opening of her mouth, the imprecision of her hands and feet, and the contrapositions between the different body parts invest her with an aura of primitivism, which is, as I will see, nevertheless also modernist. The end of Germany's colonial control in Africa had an important impact on Weimar visual culture, and the number of images of primitive, natural elements proliferated in illustrated magazines. Societies that were considered primitive were of widespread interest. For example, the Volkerschauern, in which Eric Weitz recalled that these were traveling carnival exhibits that displayed darker-skinned people like animals in a zoo. As he notes, these were encounters with a certain idea of Africa that reflected immediately what was meant to be primitive. The Berlin Museum of Volkskunde, with its ethnographic display of objects, created once more a scientific, positivist discourse that contextualizes the difference from the German in cultural terms, as Eric Weitz explained. Dancers were also borrowing elements and forms from the tradition of primitive societies, and one better example than Josephine Baker's, whose savage dances stimulated ideas of Africanness and nature. The complex meaning of Baker's dances has been extensively studied. Let us just remember that Baker embodied the natural and exotic, the expressionistic and the primitivist, and that it was these qualities that made her intrinsically modern. When she performed in 1925 in Berlin Theater der Westen with her Revue Nègre, the dances created a sensational response in the capital of the Weimar Republic. Nancy Neno brilliantly described the overwhelming reception of Josephine, pointing to how Baker, by displaying several phases of the primitive, could assimilate these into modern culture. Edmund Radzinsky, who wrote Countess Leon Palucca, recognizes how there were certain elements of African dance in certain leg and feet movement of Palucca. Her frontality, her impulsivity, and the disassociation between upper and lower body. Palucca's dancing can be considered as holding together primitivist and modernist, while her abstracted formal movement. Notion of the primitive were nevertheless encrypted into specific spaces within the modernity of the city, for example, ballroom dancing. The critic Willy Wolfrath distinguished how the way Palucca rapidly rotates with steps, these are common and non-artistic. She reminds of the rapid ballroom dances of the blacks. Referring to jazz, charleston, and shimmy in vogue in the United States first and in Weimar Germany later, Wolfrath is associating Palucca with the modernity of the city, with its changes and social dances. Yet, these dances, with their loudness and frenetic styles, were also considered closer to nature, supposedly mimicking movements from African society. When describing Palucca's dance as common and non-artistic, he's investing her with a characteristic that is related to primitive world, but also containing the modernity of the city into modernist shapes. Writing about Palucca and referring to shimmy and charleston, Wolfrath situates her dance as holding together the tension that exists between modernism and primitivism. Far from displaying Western fantasies about Africa as Baker did, Palucca's distinct movement referred to another sphere of geometry, of clarity, of non-referentiality. One of Palucca's dances was entitled Golliwog, Cakewalk, and it is a direct reference to the cakewalk that parodied ballroom dancing and manners. My first dances were primarily dances where many jumps were inserted, remembers Palucca. For example, in Gollywog's cakewalks, there should have been everything that I knew from acrobatics. I found it beautiful. If it was artistic, that was another discourse, she said. For Palucca, there was a link between sharp and strong movements, acrobatics, and elements from an African context, ballroom dances, and other popular culture which she was exposed to. While there is no room in this paper for a longer discussion of Palucca's situation among the developments of popular dance forms, it is important to recognize that the accounts of her dancing established some affinities with charleston, shimmy, and golliwog, dances that were popular in Weimar Germany. But to conclude, I would like to show this picture which summarizes Palucca's influence in the Bauhaus community. Here, she makes the group dance. The photograph, taken by T. Lux Peininger in 1927 after one of her performances at the Bauhaus, shows Palucca in the middle of things. She's a trait d'union between the Claes, Clay and his wife, her pianist Ender Trantau, and Carla Grosch, one of her students. The figures are holding each other, linking their arms and lifting up their knees, mimicking a dance pose, as in a review kickline. It shows how prone Palucca was to image making, especially through affiliating herself closely with a prominent member of the Bauhaus, an aspect we briefly touched upon when starting the paper. First analyzed by John Tiller, the reference to dance troupes, girls in line holding each other, performing a sequence of pre-taught kicks, big, small, halfway, three-quarter, and round, had a great visual impact on the audience. It was a popular form of entertainment in 1920s Germany, one that raises issues of female visibility, commodity culture, and increasing technologization. The photograph of Palucca and Clay shows how this particular dance form dominated not only the performance scenes, but also made dancers and non-dancers imitate the poses of the revue girls. While reviewing the Palucca School in 1926, a critic underlined how her dance was the contrary of the mechanized revue girls. The body of Palucca is never scenery, never decorative, but it's always used as a whole body. The critic brought attention to the importance of the physical in Palucca's dances and how her modernist dance considered the body as exposing dance as a whole, and she exposed herself as dance. However inappropriate an association between the Tiller girls and Palucca might seem, there also could be similarities between these dancers, for example in the presentation of precise geometric shapes on stage. While Palucca's bare-legged costume showed her androgynous body, the Tiller girls were sexualized in their feminine clothes, pointing to opposite examples of what it meant to be a dancer in Weimar Germany. Their bodies shared a concern with performing for a public on stage, and how this relates to an extended register of physicality on the one hand, and the circulation of that body in other mediated forms on the others, in photographs, posters, and similar marketing devices that both Palucca and the Tiller girls used. So this innocuous image of Palucca taken at the Bauhaus, while offering a glimpse of her offstage give us a way to contextualize her dance into the broader culture of Weimar Germany. Like Klee, the Bauhaus teachers, as Kandinsky and Mulholland, met her after her performances, spent vacations together, and kept in contact over many years. Palucca's engagement with these key protagonists of the Bauhaus, though apparently marginal, points to the context that occurred between them and to the influential exchanges existing between art and dance, in a similar way that Mondrian's painting in Palucca's studio did. These exemplify the way Palucca belonged to modernism through pointing out her creative strategic association with senior members of the Bauhaus. She managed to gain importance in the field of dance, but also in the field of art. Modernism gave Palucca the structure to create herself an identity and a memory as a modern dancer. In 1987, Palucca made a bold and direct comparison between her dance and Mondrian art. Responding to a question in an interview, she said, "I aim to dance as Mondrian painted," she declared, without explaining exactly how her dance might resemble the compositional equilibrium of Mondrian abstract paintings. Palucca's desire to dance like Mondrian might hinder a more complex reading of the historical encounters she had. At the end of the 80s, while dance developments in the world have set Palucca apart, she wanted to revive her memory, and she might have been aware that the public interest of her early career was generated because associated with modern art. Her early career was interlinked with the celebrated figures of abstract art. So let us take Palucca's quote at face value, remembering how her affiliation with modern art requires careful consideration regarding the motivations of self-fashioning an image and the presentation of that image to the public, one that still reaches us today. Palucca wanted to be remembered as a modernist muse.